Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I am Paul Melmeyer, Director of Federal Policy at the National Organization for Rare Disorders. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a national nonprofit organization advocating for all 30 million Americans with a rare disease, now in our 34th year. Of the many programs that we offer, I am in our Federal Policy Department, and located here in DC, we advocate for rare disease patients here on Capitol Hill, as well as in administrative agencies and the NIH. So I was asked today to provide kind of a level set, a baseline on rare disease incentives. And to talk about rare disease incentives, of course, we need to start with the Orphan Drug Act of 1983, the granddaddy of them all, in a sense. And I'm going to kind of walk through the incentives that are included within the Orphan Drug Act and the journey that orphan drugs actually go on as they move their way through the preclinical phase, the clinical trial phase, and then on to approval and marketing. So the Orphan Drug Act was passed in 1983 out of the recognition of just the stark need that existed within the rare disease community at the time and still exists today in many senses. Before 1983, in the decade before 1983, there were only 10 new treatments that were brought to market by private industry, and only 34 orphan drugs in existence in general before 1983. So clearly recognizing that there were still nearly 7,000 diseases needed to be treated, Congress acted and passed the Orphan Drug Act. So what incentives are in the bill? So first we should discuss orphan designation. This is the first step for an orphan drug as it makes its way through the development process. So in order to be designated as an orphan drug by the FDA, first, it needs to, simply meet the qualifications of any other drug that's going to make its way through the FDA. So qualifications put forward by the FD&C Act for small molecule drugs, and then for Section 351 of the Public Health Services Act. There, the FDA then determines whether the drug is intended to treat a rare disease or condition. And there are actually two ways that the FDA can determine this. Either it affects fewer than 200,000 people in the US in any given year, or it affects more, but there is no reasonable expectation a company will recover costs through sales. Now, over 99% of orphan drugs have been designated based upon that first qualifier there, that they treat fewer than 200,000 individuals. There have only been a handful that have been designated as an orphan due to the second qualifier. So as the orphan drug makes its way through the clinical trial process and then is approved by the FDA, it will then receive 7 years of exclusivity for that drug. And then that means that the FDA will not approve the same drug by another company in that 7 years. So this 7 years of exclusivity is defined in the Orphan Drug Act itself. And there are actually several other incentives within the Orphan Drug Act that are very important for development for orphan drugs. First of all, the Orphan Products Grant Program, which is actually since been renamed as the Orphan Products Clinical Trial Grant Program, was created by the Orphan Drug Act. And this appropriates about $15 million per year in grants. FDA administers the grant programs, and since 1983, there have been 2,500 applications that have been submitted. The program has funded over 590 studies, and actually 60 drugs on the market today have received funding from the Orphan Products Grant Program. So it's very important to reiterate how important this program is to the development of orphan therapies. Actually, I should mention this is topical because this program is up for reauthorization within the user fee tax that are being discussed, actually literally right now over Energy and Commerce, but also in general in Congress over the next month or two. A third incentive included within the Orphan Drug Act is the Orphan Drug Tax Credit. And sadly, it looks like my graph got a bit warped, but I'll explain it. So the Orphan Drug Tax Credit allows companies to claim up to 50% of their qualified clinical testing expenses, as a tax credit. So not all companies opt for the ODTC. Many take the R&D tax credit up until they get designation, then they get the Orphan Drug Tax Credit, and then not all companies actually qualify for the Orphan Drug Tax Credit. But what this graph was intended to show was that without the Orphan Drug Tax Credit, 33% fewer orphan drugs would have been developed over the past 34 years, and 33% fewer orphan drugs would be developed going forward. It's that important to the development of orphans that this tax credit is in place. So we at NORD really need to reiterate the importance of this tax credit for incentivizing development in rare diseases. In 1992, an exemption from FDA user fees was added to the Orphan Drug Act. This exemption only applies to the application fee, which in 2017 was a little over $2 million, so no small amount of money, but this is very important for orphan developers so they do have to pay this fee. It could act as a disincentive. And then this graph here kind of just brings us all together on when all of this takes place within the development landscape. So if an orphan drug is designated after preclinical, before, let's say, going into phase 1, there's no set time for designation, but that's generally about when it oftentimes happens. Then it qualifies for the Orphan Drug Tax Credit, it qualifies for the Orphan Product Grants Program, and then moving through the different clinical trial phases upon approval, it is granted the 7 years of marketing exclusivity, and it also has the fee waived at that time as well. So has it been successful? The Orphan Drug Act, absolutely it has. This is a graph from the FDA that was presented in January or so that shows that designations since 1983 have been skyrocketing. Not nearly a hockey stick graph, but it's pretty close. At this point, we're up to, it looks like about nearly 500 designations, or 500 requests for designations in a given year, and about 280 or so designations. And this is really indicative of the direction that the orphan drug market is going and what we have to hope for all these new orphan drugs going forward. Just a couple additional incentives to mention. These are incentives by exemption. They are actually trying to avoid disincentives for orphan drugs. First of all, orphan drugs are exempt from the annual fee on branded prescription drug manufacturers and importers, included within the Affordable Care Act. We'll, of course, see if that fee continues after this year. That incentive technically could go away. Orphans are also exempt from the 340B program. And currently, they're exempt from the requirements within the Pediatric Research and Equity Act. So that is also being discussed currently within the UFA context for within the Race for Kids Act, as well as in a handful of other proposals. One final incentive to mention, those of you who journeyed through the 21st Century Cures Act, remember the Rare Pediatric Disease Priority Review Voucher Program. This program was reauthorized within Cures, and it works to incentivize development within rare pediatric diseases by offering a priority review voucher for qualified drugs. That priority review voucher can then be used for a more expedited review by the FDA in another drug that would not have already qualified for a priority review. So thank you again for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end.